Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about an exciting topic called sort of configuring your own reference lab. It's one of the features that any of us who have used AiM devices for a while have really wanted. And so it's something which is an exciting sort of development in terms of software. Before we get going, if somebody in the chat box could just give me a thumbs up saying you can hear me fine and you can see my screen, that would be great. All good, thanks so much, which is good. And what I'm going to do is I am going to get going. We're going to have a little bit of a sort of a classroom style to start off with. Then we're going to get into the software and get going. So welcome to all of you and thank you all for being here today. So what do we mean by configure your own reference lab? Well, one of the things that I often think about as I'm on track is, okay, what kind of lap time am I looking at on the device itself? Oftentimes you find yourself in a situation whereby some of us just like seeing a lap time that comes up every time we go over start finish. Oh, I just did a, I don't know, 1 minute 15 point something or other. That's great. And each lap time you get that reference. I actually choose to use that in a race because I'd rather focus on the race and not necessarily chasing a lap time. But in qualifying, oftentimes I want to be able to look at a predictive lap time that helps me identify where I'm sort of faster or slower at a particular point. But one of the things that's always potentially been missing in the conversation is, what if there's a lap time that I want to be able to chase? What if there's a lap that I've done previous visit to the track, sorry, excuse me, a scenario where it may be a different driver in terms of that data, and I want to upload that lap into the actual dash itself, so sorry today, to be able to follow. And so that's what we're going to have a look at today. How do I customize my own reference lap so I can actually chase a lap that I've determined rather than necessarily the prediction that is coming from the device itself? So just to put that into context, what I'm going to do is sort of talk through key aspects. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the reference lap time. Just a quick overview in terms of what we're talking about. The second is that we're going to talk about compatible devices. Unfortunately, not every single AiM device is modern enough to be able to sort of use this function or allow you to use this function. So we'll talk about which software, more importantly, which hardware is capable of being able to use this particular function. The next is we're going to talk about preparation. For being able to use the reference lap time, you have to update both your software and firmware to be able to do this. This is one of the things that a lot of times updating software and firmware is something that we don't always remember to be able to do, but it's something that's really important to be able to do this. Then we're just going to get into a live demonstration and a Q&A on this particular topic. So I want to start by talking about the reference lap itself and what we actually mean. And in this instance, I've put in two particular examples that are here in terms of how they usually display on different devices. Sometimes you see a lap come up as a number. Now, this could be a predictive lap time if you've put it into the system. It could have been the last lap time you did. You could have multiple views of this. Or oftentimes you actually look at a lap time that you're chasing. So this will either change as you go around the lap, being able to say you're up or you're down, or your predictive lap time this time around is a 203.24. You may have just done a 205, and so to be able to see a 203 is exciting. Or similarly, what you've got here is you've got the ability to be able to change that to a plus or a minus that allows you to be able to see, okay, well, that's, I'm 3/10 in this instance, nearly 4/10 up on this lap over the previous lap. And so I want to be able to, continue to be able to see that. And so this is what we call a reference lap. It's, sorry, excuse me. What is the current lap you're on, and how is that current lap doing versus a reference point that you want to be able to compare it with? And so if you're using the predictive capability that's in the device, that's broken the track down into a series of segments, and it's optimizing itself to be able to say, at this certain point on this track, you are up or down versus, the best performance that is there. But what we want to be able to do now is to be able to sort of assign a lap time. And that's very important to be able to think about. It's funny, I oftentimes think about, I watch a ton of motorsports videos. And there was a video just recently in the V8 supercars in Australia, where there was the first time there's ever been a lap time on Mount Panorama, where a driver a few years ago called Scott McLaughlin set the fastest ever lap time. It was there. Well, as he was going around, what was really interesting was the commentators were saying, And what the team has done is inserted a lap that Scott is able to chase, and he can see the temps up or down in terms of the best lap that's been done so far this weekend. And all I kept thinking was, it would be lovely if I could be able to do that in terms of the software. And so that's what we want to be able to look at. How do I chase a lap that I've done or another driver has done so that we can move forward from there? So it's important to be able to identify then, what do we do and how do we assign this particular lap? Now, this varies from device to device, but it's important to be able to identify what the type of reference laps are that you can actually look at. Now, in reality, there are sort of 4 major variants in terms of the lap time that can be used. Depending on the software and the hardware that you have the opportunity, especially on the more modern devices, to be able to chase the best lap of the test, which is the session that you're in at the time. And so that's usually which most of us use and is universally sort of available across most of the devices we use. Even some of the older devices like an original AiM Solo or a Evo 4 or even an Evo 4S now, these are sort of like the best lap of the test. Next one you can look at is best lap of today. Now, this is a feature that very few people actually use, but you can actually change many devices, just like this little Solo today, even if you've never updated the software on it, to be able to assign best lap of the day. And this is a way of being able to say, okay, well, I'm running a test day today. I've changed all sorts of things up. You know, based on these changes I'm making, can I actually look at the best lap of today? You can also assign it against the previous lap, which is, am I doing better or worse than the last lap I did? But what we're actually going to look at today is we're actually going to assign this in relation to what's the user reference lap that we specified. And just to give you an idea, this is the interface. And today we're just going to be using the trusty Solo 2. We're not going to do anything more fancy than this in terms of application because it's available on the entry-level device that many, many people actually have. You can see in this instance that you have the option in the settings of the Solo 2 to be able to put in the lap of today, best lap of the test, the previous lap, or now the user reference. And so that's what we're going to be able to sort of set and assign as we go forward. Now, a lot of people may be wondering, well, why do I actually want to do this? Well, for me, there are certain reasons that I'd want to be able to do this. The first is that if I haven't been to a track for a long period of time, I may want to go back to the archives of the data that I have and be able to find a lap time in that particular vehicle, where the conditions might be different, who knows? That's something we've got to be able to bear in mind to be able to say, you know, have I done this before? And that's one of the things that I often find that we think about with data is that I find myself in a situation that to inspire confidence that I can do something is to identify if I've done it before. And that's a very interesting sort of dynamic. The longer we're out of the car, oftentimes the more we potentially forget. So to have my own reference. The other aspect is, and this is important because you'd work this with friends or coach or whatever the decision is that you may also want to be able to chase somebody else's lap. And so as long as it's at the same track and the same configuration, you can actually assign somebody else's lap. So let's say, for example, I was being coached for the day and I was trying to identify a particular point on track where someone's distinctly faster or slower. I can look at that in the data. But if I can also see that in front of me on the dash, I can also start understanding in real time, rather than looking at the data when I'm in the paddock or in the trailer or wherever I'm going to be. And instead, in this instance, I can look at it and say, oh, wow, next lap around, try something different, because you can see immediately that's why that person is gaining speed against you. And it's a nice way of being able to do it. So it's a cool feature to be able to have. So to be able to get yourself ready for it, it's important to be able to know what devices can and can't do this. And I have to say, as a Formula 4 driver, I use an Evo 4S. Sorry, excuse me. And that's not available today within the device that we have. The sort of electronics inside the device just aren't advanced enough to be able to do this. But if you have any of the devices that are on the screen right now that you're using, from the trusty AiM Solo 2 to the DL, all the way through to some of the more advanced dashes and setup, any of these particular scenarios, you have the opportunity of being able to do this. Now, there are a few other devices outside of this that will do it as well. For example, the MXSL, the MX2E, and the MXK, and sort of, focusing on some of the ATV type stuff. But generally speaking, most of the applications will be covered on screen here in terms of the devices that will allow you to be able to do this particular function. So it does cover a very large percentage of people who are doing this. In fact, you can probably appreciate the frustration of some of us who are in that minority who can't actually use this, but at the same time, it's a feature that obviously we can use, and I carry my Solo 2 with me absolutely everywhere I'm going. In fact, as true demonstration style would be, it just decided to turn itself off, which is my own fault anyway. So we'll just turn that back on for a bit later on. Now there's a chat box come up, which is here. So MXL2 not compatible. No, unfortunately not. It's one of the only other dashes that isn't functional in terms of being able to do this, unfortunately. So yeah, shame that's not the case, but again, a bit of a sort of a frustration that it's not available for everyone, but that's just the advancement as the software develops. So does the hardware, and so does the functionality that's available. I think that's just one of those things that we all have to sort of work through. So what I'm going to do now is just make sure that we're all ready for being able to do this. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's some updates to firmware and software. Now, this is an important component. This is something that, you know, we oftentimes see doesn't get done enough, a large part due to the fact that the next time we turn on Race Studio 3, we might be at the track, and we all know what web Wi-Fi connections are like at the track. It's really kind of disappointing. So we just carry on as normal, not updating the device because we're not connected to the internet. But this is the best way of being able to do it. I do this at home when you get the chance to be able to make sure all of your devices are updated as they possibly can. Now, the first, as we all know, is to click on this little cloud icon here. If you know this inside out, I apologize for pointing out the obvious, but I want to make sure that we're clear on how this process works. So you click here on the little device icon here. This gives you, this list comes up of all the available options. If you click and download all the updates at that point, you get all the latest firmware. So you can see here what's available on the web and what you've downloaded. Those two should match up, and then they won't be bold, and then you won't need to download it's available. And then the next thing you'll need to do is click on this button that says update device. I might caveat at this point that I didn't point out that your actual device needs to be connected. When you're updating the device, you have to have it connected. It's the most obvious thing to be able to say, but at the same time, I need to make sure that when you have the opportunity to click update device, it has to be connected to the actual setup. And when you do that, this little box will pop up for a firmware upgrade. You can see that I've already done this. And so if you click on the button here, this will select the device. And if you click down here in step number 4 and click on update device, that will just update your firmware and you're ready to go with this new particular feature that is here. So this is an important sort of component. We don't see many scenarios where devices are updated as often as they need to be. Same scenario usually applies, is that we're not using the software until we're at the track, and then one thing leads to another and we're not necessarily able to update. The other thing is important is if you don't know if your device is updated or not, there is usually a telltale sign, and that telltale sign pops up here. And there is a little blue icon, which is 1 arrow going that direction and 1 arrow going that direction. That means there is a firmware update available for your particular device. That's important to be able to do that as well. So once you've done these things and you've got your device ready to go, mine's all set up, ready to go here, and we're going to use this as part of today's demonstration. We're ready to be able to get into looking at this from a demonstration point of view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out of the PowerPoint, load up Race Studio 3. Quick yes or no on the chat box would be lovely if you can see Race Studio 3. I did talk for 10 minutes on one presentation, no one could see anything. So if you can all see Race Studio 3, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to focus on making sure that we are updating and putting our own reference lab into the device. Now, this involves using Race Studio 3 across all its functionality. Not only are we going to need to go into the new analysis software to be able to make this happen, but we're also going to need to make sure that we're either part, of the devices that are connected. So we're going to look at that as we go through. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go into the analysis software. Now, many of us are using this now as our default software to be able to analyze labs. And I have to say, this is the place where you go if you want to be able to set your own reference lab. I've got a few tests that are set up here to be able to use. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pick something that I practiced on earlier. So hopefully it goes smoothly. So I'm going to pick here. It was earlier this year in April, and I was at Silverstone on the Silverstone National Track. And you can see that there are some laps that are here that are available. So let's say, for example, I'm out on track right now. And one of the things you'll also notice that I'm doing here is I'm actually using a lap time that has been generated by a different logger than necessarily the lap time that is coming from this solo 2. You don't have to use the lap that has been generated by the device itself. Just as long as you've got a fast lap at that track, and you want to use that as a reference point, you can use that to be able to create your own reference lap. Large part being is that effectively the software has set up the same track in all devices that you're going forward. So if somebody else has got a lap time you want to take and they're using, in this case, if it were me, they're using an Evo 4S and they've logged the lap and you want to upload it to an AiM Solo 2, no problem at all. You can do that without any worries. So what we need to do here is we need to start thinking about what lap we want to use. So clearly here there's a relatively decent lap here in qualifying. I say relatively decent for me, maybe not relatively decent for the other drivers who are remarkably fast in these cars. But I'm going to open it up, and the first thing that's going to do is it's going to load up a user profile. Now, we've done webinars on user profile and looking at all these details and everything before. So if you're interested in terms of, oh, that's an interesting profile that James has got set up there and everything, that's something that's covered in previous webinars. And so you can just go onto YouTube from AiM Shop and find many of the ones where we talked about setting up a user profile and working it. Today, we're actually not going to do a huge amount in here, except for choose the laps that we want to actually be able to work with. And so what we're going to do is we are going to click on laps, and we're going to be presented with this box of all the laps that are available. And as per usual, sorry, excuse me, I'm just recovering from a cold. And so I apologize for the absolutely random and unpredictable cough that comes without warning. So sorry about that for all of you who are like, oh, terrible delivery today. So in many instances, what we've got here is we've got the series of laps that are here. And usually, you know, we can analyze and do all sorts of things with them. But anyone who's ever seen a webinar from me will know that my general sort of belief is that curiosity is your friend when it comes to Race Studio 3. And many of you may have already found this feature by right-clicking on things. And my favorite curiosity of all, anywhere in Race Studio 3, is like if anyone were here, for example, I right-click on it, a box pops up. If I right-click here, a different box pops up. And so just like that, one of the options that you have down here associated with the laps is to be able to right-click. And so you choose the lap you want to be able to work with, you right-click on it, and right at the very top of the page, you now have top of the page, sorry about that, top of the box in terms of the options that are there. You have this that says generate predictive reference lap from this lap. You're like, okay, well, that's the lap I want to be able to choose. So if I click on that, this new box pops up. And this new box is really interesting because this is where you're going to go in and start naming your actual laps that you're using. Now, one of the things that I've struggled with is being able to name my laps or file name in 8 characters or less, because as you can probably appreciate, I love to talk, I love to add words and, you know, furnish things with a lot of sort of like words. And so how am I going to do this in 8 laps? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put SILVBEST, so Silverstone Best. Now, I'll tell you later why this is an interesting thing, because it may not necessarily be as intuitive as calling it that later on, and I'll explain why as we start looking through this. But I do have the opportunity of going in here and saying Silverstone National Best Lap I've done in the RF, which is the type of car that I have, 07, so a Van Diemen RF 07. So I can say Silverstone National Best Lap I've done in an RF 07. All I need to do then is click on OK. And this box pops up and says, please go to any device page to transmit this reference lap to any compatible device. Now, remember, it's important, compatible device. And so remember, before you start thinking about whether this is an option, make sure you check the list and whether your option is there. It's interesting, my second favorite dash is the MXL2. It's one of the best ones I think AIM's ever done, and that's just the only other one that it's not available on. So I can appreciate the little bit of frustration there. But generally speaking, for the majority of us who also may who may carry a second logger, of course we all carry second loggers. I actually have this usually sort of bolted on the inside of my car because I can use it for other types of demonstrations and things that I'm doing. If you're using one of the compatible devices, this is where you're going to go. So I'm going to click on OK, and job's done. That's all I need to do in the analysis section for now, anyway, I might add. If you're ever wondering where that's popped up, you do have this new button that's here. So up here, I'm circling the mouse thing here. If I click on here, what you'll notice is that now have this predictive reference lap files manager. Just a bit of a mouthful in terms of saying that in one go. And here you've got the track name, the date and time of the test, the lap time, and that file name that I just nominated. If you add lots of laps in here, it's useful to have this as the way of being able to log all of the laps today, but we're just using one today. You've got a few options that are here as well. You can change the session itself and change the detail that we just put in there. You can delete it. And this are buttons that if you wanted to be able to transmit it to and fro. Now, there's one other button here, and I'm not going to talk about this until very at the end, but you also have the option, which gets quite handy, to make this your default lap for the track. And I'll explain why that's important as we go on. So I'm just going to click on exit here. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to go to the devices button. No, sorry, excuse me. There you go. Random cough of the day. So one of the things you notice, there's nothing there. So all I need to do right now is just move the zoom box, click on this, and just load my solo. So I'm just going to click on connect. Hopefully in the test run this morning, this loaded in about 10 seconds. But anyone who's had a Wi-Fi device knows that you could be sitting on top of the Wi-Fi router and it still takes about 22 minutes for a load. But that time we were lucky, we're there. And so I'm just going to click on that. And usual stuff usually appears here that we're all very comfortable with if we connect to our device. We've got our live measures that are here. We've got the download button that we all use regularly. It's go in and download all our sessions, all the Wi-Fi properties and everything that's fine. But we have this new tab that's appeared here once we've updated the firmware and the software called predictive reference lap. So I'm going to click here, and we've got a very similar and familiar experience that happens with Race Studio 3, and that is the device is on the screen and so is what's on your PC to be able to pass data between the two potential devices. So you notice right now there are no files on my device. So what I can do is I can say, okay, as per usual, that blinked in and out. So hold on a second, let me just go and grab that again. And you can see it's here. And then what I can do is I've got options. I can drag and drop it, or I can just click on these buttons here and it says click to copy over. So what that's done now, it's copied over. And I don't know if you noticed, but on this little button here, a little green bar came across. Now, if any of you have ever used any AiM device where you have to transmit a configuration or send data, you always see that little green bar pops across. And so that's just what was happening there. So right now, I now have this 103.1 at Silverstone National available to me now on my AiM Solo 2 as an option of being able to chase that lap time on screen as the reference lap, rather than necessarily just doing the predictive lap of either the day or the test. And so it's a nice way of being able to look at it. Now, there are a few other buttons that are here that we may want to be able to talk about to be able to go through what these actually mean. Now, the first is that we have a few options that are here. So as per usual with a demo, something always goes a little bit awry. It just blinked off for a minute. And so hopefully this comes back in just a second and shows me that that lap is there, which it is. It just loaded from the device. If you're ever wondering why that was blank and it was just loading, it was because Race Studio 3 was reading what's on the actual device, which now says PC connection, which is always encouraging that is there. So that's what's available. Now, some of the buttons are useful. If I have a device and I want to send that best lap back to my PC, I have that option of being able to do it. So I can just send it back here and bounce the sessions backwards and forwards. This button here, however, is the most important when we're thinking about what's on the device itself. When I'm talking about device, I'm talking in this instance about the Solo 2 or whatever it is. If I click here, I've got some options that are available. And there's a few things in here which are actually really useful. The first is just refresh what's on the device if you've been moving data to and fro. The next is you can transmit data to make sure the data has gone across in terms of what's happening. But there's this one here, which, you know, the internet was quite stable this morning and now it's going in and out, which I would imagine is actually my PC today more than anything else. And so I apologize for this just blinking in and out for a second. Let me just go back to that. Watch this just in case that little green arrow comes across. There it is. This is what's available here. So if I click here, this channel recording is interesting because one of the things that we may want to be able to do is to be able to record how we were doing against the reference lap that we put in when we look at it in the data. And this is to be able to record the reference lap as an actual channel. And this is a new feature, which I absolutely love the ability to do, because usually when you compare laps, you have basically the fastest lap, and then effectively you have how did you do against that lap, and you select laps and you say, this is my reference lap, I want to work on it. But you can actually use this now as a channel to be able to use, and so you just toggle that on and off as you need to. And then the last thing you're going to do on the device is assign what the lap's actually going to be. And so in this instance, because we've uploaded this, this is now highlighted as the user reference lap. If I want to tell the solo to go back to using the previous lap of the day, or the best lap of the day, or best lap of the test, I have that option of being able to do that too. So we've now got the actual lap on the device itself, and we can actually go in and reference it. Now, there's a few other things that I want to be able to point out here, and a few other options that are available. And that is, I want to be able to talk about the settings. Now, one of the things that I thought you had to do, and when it was in beta, you had to do this, but or if it wasn't, I missed this, but now it's available, is that one of the things that you used to have to do is actually change the settings on the device to go in and click on all the buttons and try and find where it is. And anyone who uses the buttons on the device, it's not as easy as doing it in the software. So what we want to do is we want to look at some of the settings that are on this device to be able to see how we want to adjust as we go forward. So if, for example, we've just connected our Solo, we've downloaded our data, and now we want to switch out from saying, you know, I no longer want to be able to work against the reference lap. I want to instead be able to work against the best lap of the day. This has now appeared at the bottom of the page. You now have this predictive lap time function that is here. And so you can go in and you can find where that lap is. So right now it's set on user reference lap, but I can toggle between these two, and I can either do it here or I can do it here. But you have the options of being able to go in and tell the Solo 2 how you want it to be able to measure the lap. Now that's nice, because for example, if you go to a different track, or you go to a different somewhere to be able to, you go to a different track, or you want to be able to use something different, or you want to toggle between all of the different ways of being able to assign a reference lap, that's quite an important thing to be able to use. Plus here, you can log on and off whether you want this channel to be recorded, which I can't imagine it taking that much space on the device. It's always nice to have that little bit of extra data. So I'm inclined to make sure this is already switched on for mine going forward. If you change any of these, you just click on transmit and you send it over to the device, and away you go. So that's really how you get it onto the device, and you start using it, and off you go. Everything is working well. Now, earlier on, I mentioned there were a few buttons that I wanted to talk about later, and that's where you get into an interesting dynamic, which is what happens if you have more than one lap at the same track. Because how does the device know which is the right lap to use as the reference? Now, you could have 5 or 10 different laps. I don't know why I chose 5 or 10. I don't know what the limit is, but you could have hundreds, I'm guessing, in terms of laps to be able to choose when you're in this particular area here, and we just have one. But what if I went in here and said, well, you know what? I want to work on a particular corner that was actually better on one lap than the other, and so I want to upload that, for example. And so if I, for example, close this and I go into some of the laps and I say, okay, well, let's click on this lap, and you can see, oh, wow, the red lap was, you know, slightly better in a few spots down here, maybe rolling speed. Let's choose this lap instead. If I right click here and say generate a predictive lap, not only do I have to say, let's say Sylv, I don't know, second best. And that's why I said it's interesting when you start thinking about your naming as to how you want to be able to name these as files to be able to look at. But you've always got the option of saying, this is the other lap I want to reference from Silverstone. So now that you've got that available to you, you click here and it said I've sent it or uploaded to a compatible device. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because which one does it choose? Which lap does it choose? Does it prefer one over the other? Well, you've got to tell it to do that. And that's why if you go in here, you have the option of nominating which is the default choice for this particular track. And so right now, if I click here, you can see that this is highlighted, and this right now is the lap that's been chosen. If I click here, it toggles it back. And so now this is, with this little icon, the lap that you've chosen that you want to be able to reference. And so it's important to be able to have this, because you want to be able to choose which lap you want to be able to reference going forward. Again, if I click out of here and I go back to the device, I click here, and I go into the predictive reference, I also have the option of being able to do that here. And so it's going to say, okay, I found this one lap, and on the device right now, it's saying that this is the lap I want to use. This lap isn't in there, so I can drag that and pop it here, just drag and drop. It's as simple as can be. But I also want to be able to make sure this is the reference lap on the device itself. So what I need to do is click on this button and away you go. It's uploaded. Now it's going to say when it's transmitted, which is already done to the device itself, it's now going to go with that lap as the reference rather than the other one. And so it's important to be able to make sure that, sorry, excuse me, as long as you've got a number of laps, you can always be able to work through these. Beyond that, there's only a few other things which are really important to be able to mention. And that's how you want to be able to potentially match. Now, you can have an absolute ton of laps that are on here. You could have as many laps as you wanted to be able to reference. They could be from different tracks. And this could be your database. In fact, so much so that if you go into the actual software itself, this is actually referred to as the reference laps manager, where you've got all of these that are available to you. And I can go through 10, 20 different tracks, upload all the laps, and this is the database where I want to be able to use them. But on the device, you might want to make life a little bit simpler. You might want to be able to use it. So there's a few other features that I do want to be able to show you. And that's if we click back into the device itself. If, for example, I don't want to have to toggle between these two, this is just the lap I want to be able to use, I can highlight it. I can click on this little button that looks like an eraser, because I think that's what it is. And I click on that, and you want to get rid of it. Yep. Hasn't got rid of it here, but it's got rid of it on the device, which is important. And it just keeps making sure that these laps are here. Now, this is the last thing that's quite interesting. You can also make sure that if you inadvertently, for example, delete a lap here, you're like, well, hold on a second, I've got my Silverstone best here and my Silverstone second best here. You can always take laps from the device itself and put them back on your PC. So use this button here. Now, all of a sudden, that's back available for you to be able to use one of these two as well. So if you ever have one lap on one device, or you're working through devices, there's an option of being able to send them backwards and forwards from that point of view. So this is a great feature to be able to use if you want to be able to chase a lap time that you've chosen. And I didn't necessarily want this webinar to necessarily go the whole hour in terms of what it is, because it's not, you know, the meatiest of subjects, but wanted to be able to then sort of stop and see if there are any questions that are coming up, any things that people want to be able to get a little bit more information on, so we can maybe be able to answer some questions as part of the webinar. Feel free to type them in the box if you want to as well. So Axel writes, can I create a perfect lap from the different sectors from I actually wrote that to the folks at AiM Software this morning, saying I can almost guarantee the question's going to come up, because it's exactly how my brain's working, which is, can I create a perfect lap from different sectors based on where we are? And if you're an iRacing user, for example, on Sim or whatever need to be, you often have your best sector lap, which I love, which you can use. And in this instance, you've not got that. You've got predictive, you've got best lap of the day. So my ask to the AiM folks, and I don't know if it's something that they can generate, I didn't get an answer just yet, but at the same time, if that happens to be the case, look out for that as an update. If you are a recipient of the AiM Technologies newsletter, we may be able to add that in as a feature update that is there as well. And so, yeah, a lot of people, Logan's asked it, Roger, who runs so many of these webinars for AiM Sports in the US, and who I learned nearly everything that I could possibly learn from AiM, also said that he asked the same thing as well. So I think that's got to be the next evolution of the next lap in terms of what we're looking at. Now, the difference is we have to be able to distinguish what the difference would be, because the first is that if you're in the session and you want to be able to get, or even from the lap of the day, and you're like, well, I just want to be able to, you know, work as a reference lap against my best time. Well, that's what the predictive lap time is going to do anyway. What we need to be able to specify is what our own preference is in terms of, remember when we build here, I'll just reshare my screen. And if I reshare, if we go back to Race Studio 3, which you should all see right now, which is here. If we go back to this, what I've requested, which I think is important, is I've nominated what these corners look like. And so instead of the system doing a predictive overview in terms of, oh, well, I just want to be able to predict the best lap, which is what the system has done for years. In this instance, if you've specified what your sectors are, and you've got your split time, you can potentially say, I want to work against my theoretical best here. And if I were to right click here, the option would be. So that's where my brain's thinking. And it sounds like many other people are thinking similar as well. So That's what hopefully will sort of evolve next in terms of an option. Because for me, as a sim racer as well, when I'm practicing out of season, that's one of the best things that I find to be able to use. What if you don't have reference laps? People not willing to share data, want to create laps from best data? Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's going to be interesting in terms of the sharing of laps in terms of where that is. I think this is going to be a hugely valuable example of people who, if you've got a very tangible sort of scenario with a coach or someone who's driven your car before, or they've driven their car. I'm lucky enough to have some exceptionally fast drivers in the garage who I race with. And we had that discussion in terms of, is this something that we can do in terms of, whether I'm going to find 2 seconds and become a threat to them is a different story altogether. But at the same time, it's an interesting sort of dialogue. Another reason for multiple laps, same track, especially dry and wet. Absolutely. Roger points out quite well, sort of importantly, and thank you for saying that, Roger, is that the one thing that Don was there, who's on this call here, as many of you may have been, which was we were at Silverstone just 2 weeks ago. And over 4 days, the weather conditions were, well, wet, slippery, dry, slippery, just all sorts of manner of completely different. And so having multiple laps, and I think it's interesting as you put into that sort of, imagine you had SIL for Silverstone wet, Silverstone damp, Silverstone, I don't know, whatever. Having different variations in terms of weather and everything set up is important. And one of the things that I've sort of appreciated more and more, especially when I was living in the US, based on the variance in terms of heat, especially during a day. So you could have sessions with morning, day, evening, and oftentimes track conditions could drop a second or two in the afternoon based upon how hot the track had got. And so, yeah, great point to be able to raise, and thank you for that. So any other questions? Be interested in a quick show of hands, or not show of hands, or just people put in the comment. Do you think this is something you're going to use? Maybe writing a yes or maybe in the comment box would be useful. Maybe, got some maybes. Yeah, I think it's would you use it? Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I've wanted for quite some time. Yeah, we'll see how it is. The other thing as well, because it's a new feature and I didn't have this ready to go before we got to the racing a couple of weeks ago, is maybe a follow-up will be, how does the analysis differ if we're analyzing how you did against a reference lap that you put in rather than something else? But I agree with you, Kev. I'm in the same boat, Evo 4S, MXL2, but yeah, good stuff. Cool. Any other questions or comments based on today's webinar? Brilliant. Well, I was going to say thanks to everyone for being here, which is fantastic. You'll see a rerun of this available on YouTube at sometime over the next few days. And yeah, we'll keep sort of moving forward, but never be shy in terms of sending information. And if you do have questions, the support folks at AiM Technologies are absolutely fantastic. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. But beyond that, please feel free to log off now. If you want to stay and ask a question or two, that's fine. I'll leave it going for another 5 minutes. But with that, I'll say thanks so much to all of you for attending today. Logan, good question in terms of motor. I'm guessing motorbike. Sorry if I'm being crass here. Because I think, yes, absolutely. So We have talked about this in the US. The AiM Sports have a regular who attends their webinars, who works on bikes and races bikes. So I think it's something that we want to be able to sort of think about for our AiM shop, AiM Technologies, as we look at more of the international markets on there. So it's a focal point that we want to be able to sort of put in place, because you're absolutely right. There are things that, as a car racer, I have very limited experience and knowledge in, whether it be lean angle or whatever need be. So the goal is, yes, over time to be able to bring in more. And one of the things that I would recommend is, think about AiM in terms of the overall AiM community. There are some great videos on YouTube from motorbike races as well. Okay, fantastic. So with that, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you all again, and hopefully see you again next time.